We are going to proceed with the meaning of economic globalization, showing what are the main drivers for economic globalization and what are the opportunities given by globalization and its impact on developing nations. Then we're going to talk about the development agenda of 2030 and the challenges of sustainability in developing nations. The economic literature has shown that there is a growing consensus that economic development is a multidimensional process that involves overlapping interactions between its different objectives. Achieving sustainable development has become one of the most important and urgent needs in the development agenda in most developing nations, which is considered a great challenge, especially in such a changing and globalized economy. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development commits to promoting development in a balanced way, economically, socially, and environmentally in all countries of the world, leaving no one behind and paying special attention to those people who are poorest or most excluded. Our world economy has witnessed a lot of crises since the global financial crisis 2008 to the pandemic of COVID-19 in 2020 to recently the Russian-Ukrainian war in 2022. Such crises have caused a huge rise in global food and energy prices and an increase in the indebtedness of many countries, especially for developing countries that suffer from weak economies and distorted prices. To keep pace with the new and evolving events and trends, many changes must be made in the policies and strategies adopted by governments of developing nations. So let me first explain what is meant by economic globalization. And let me also say that globalization have many types of globalization before talking about the economic globalization. We have social globalization, we have cultural globalization, even we have globalization of tourism, even we have now globalization of diseases like COVID-19. We are going to focus on economic globalization and show that there is no unique definition for economic globalization. It represents the shift towards an integrated and interlinked world economy and converting the separate national economies into an integrated world economy. The features of this economic globalization are the removal or decline in barriers imposed against the flow of international trade, capital movements, and factors of production among countries. So what are the main drivers of economic globalization? In fact, we are focusing on two main drivers. One of them is the decline in trade barriers and the sign-up of GATT agreements and the establishment of the WTO in 1995, because this liberalization process that happened either on the multilateral basis or on bilateral basis has caused the majority of trade increase in world trade and also increase or the changing structure of international trade. The majority of trade nowadays is in intra-industry trade rather than inter-industry trade. This is due to specialization within transnational corporations. Thus, a significant portion of world trade is conducted on the basis of corporate strategies that may or may not conform with the rules of the market. Also, the service market or the services have captured the majority of international trade conducted as opposed to trade in goods. Such services as telecommunication, accounting, banking, and credit law, medical services, education, travel, tourism, and entertainment. This was the result of several factors, including the idea of opening up of new areas for investment in services in the context of that. On the other hand, regarding the exports of manufactured goods, the shift is currently towards the products of industrial sector that are characterized by higher technological content. Higher technological content means higher expenditure on R&D or research and development. The evolution of regional economic integration, such as that of EU or a NAFTA area, North America Free Trade Area, including Mexico, Asia, including Japan and newly industrialized countries, is usual, and note that the impact and nature of this regional integration is not here felt in this presentation. The flow of FDI and international capital mobility increased significantly, not only between developed countries, but also related to developing countries. And the second driver to economic globalization I focus on It is not only I focus all my presentation and keynote speech on the role played by technological progress and the role played by information and communication technology revolution. Technological progress, although the removal of trade barriers paved the way for allowing for the increase in the volume of international trade, there was no room for taking the benefit of this opportunity without the technological progress, especially in the field of transportation. Below are two main technical progresses in this respect. The first one is the establishment of containerizations and modern transport modes, and the second one is the establishment of microprocessing and internet. The first one means the evolution of containerizations regionalized international trade, as it has greatly reduced the cost of transportation. And this leads to huge amount of goods transported in one shipment along large distance without the fear of losing those products, especially agricultural products. Also, the evolution of jet aircraft and motorways also supported the decline in transportation costs. This decrease in the transportation cost has caused to or this reduction in largest trading area and enable firms to exploit international cost differential through the fragmentation and relocation of production and local sourcing. The development of microprocessors facilitated the flow and storage of information. It gave a room for the evolution of worldwide web that allowed for the evolution of e-commerce. E-commerce was especially beneficial for small companies that are now able to market their products abroad without no need to inject huge investments. Satellite technology and modern telecommunication digital systems are complements to microprocessing. Now, after we understood what is meant by economic globalization, and after we understood now the main drivers to economic globalization, now we shift to what will be the possible impacts on developing nations. As we all know, that globalization gives many opportunities to all nations, because through enlarging the markets, through economies of scale, through improving the quality of the product and services provided. But from my point of view, that these opportunities went only to developed nations, and they gained a lot from this globalization process, lefting developing nations behind. These parties with the negative side of such information, and let me concentrate here about information globalization, which is known as techno-global globalization and diffusion, because from my point of view, that IT or the information technology, this is the main cause that hindered or increases the gap or the development gap between the developed and developing nations. It is considered to be as the main obstacle for developing nations to achieve their development agenda for 2030. That's why all the presentations going from now to the end of my presentation, I'm going to focus on the role played of information technology. These parties, as I told you, with the negative side of such information technology globalization and diffusion, which is a widening competitive and development gap between the developed and developing countries, showing how some countries were able to narrow this gap. As I told you, from my point of view, that globalization has led to more disparities. We have development, we have information gap that has led to development gap and more poverty in developing nations. The disparities in the globalization of IT process, as there is a strong information gap that adds to competitive gap, which deepens the development gap. Most of the globalization activities were largely concentrated in three main industrial centers and economic boosts, namely the United States of America, Japan, and Western Europe. It is only in the past few years that some of the newly industrialized countries have also started to play a role. In contrast, most developing countries have struggled in acquiring, retrieving, processing, and dismantling information of various types. IT is different in the South, where raw information is lacking, as well as the means to convert it into knowledge. Information poverty in the South takes many forms and causes dire consequences. Only the OECD countries and a few newly industrialized countries have been able to contribute to new technologies. The existing conditions in developing countries, economic or otherwise, make it difficult for them to participate in the globalization process. Some of these conditions are poor economies, which are largely based on primary sector, high population growth rate, government failure in managing technological change, lack of skilled personnel, poor industrial base, poor telecommunications infrastructure, lack of IT policies which could motivate and guide activities, limited applications of IT due to the cost involved, or lack of economic incentives towards IT, and lack of entrepreneurs seeking opportunities upward. With many of the above issues in mind, it is not surprising that so few developing countries have been able to play an active role in the globalization of IT process. These countries have responded to this challenge by formulating national IT policies, upgrading infrastructure such as telecommunications, developing human resources, and experimenting with various institutions and incentives to develop local capabilities in IT. Some countries in Asia, such as Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, have been more successful. Their lessons of experience could indeed be valuable to less developed countries. Now we move to the development agenda of 2030, showing how we moved from MDGs to in year 2000 to the 17 SDGs and the development agenda to year 2030. Understand?
Professor, you please
Yes?
wrap it up, please. Okay, in a few minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Understanding the United Nations Development Agenda at the beginning of the new millennium in 2000, world leaders gathered at the United States to shape a vision to fight poverty in its many dimensions. The vision was translated into 8 Millennium Development Goals, and the Millennium Development Goals framework has guided development work across the world for the past 15 years. These are the 8 goals of the Millennium Development Goals in year 2000 to 2015. Significant achievements have been made, but many people are being left behind, and that was the problem with the MDGs. Gender inequality persists. Big gaps exist between the poorest and the richest households, rural and urban areas. Climate change and environmental degradation undermine any progress achieved. Poor people suffer the most. Conflict remains the biggest threat to human development, and millions of people still live in poverty and hunger without access to basic services. However, of course, the MDGs agenda proved that global action can work. That's why they shifted to another agreement, and that happened in the origin. Now talk about the origin of the United Nations 2030 agenda. Since 2012, United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development that happened in Rio de Janeiro, and they replaced the MDGs to SDGs. The MDGs did not consider environmental issues such as emissions of greenhouse gases, access to green drinking water, management of water resources, and become now more focused on the concept of sustainable development. From that day, they start considering sustainable development with more and widened dimensions to include social, environmental, and economic dimensions. The main goal focuses on 5 P's: people, which is the well-being of all people; planet, protection of the Earth's ecosystem; prosperity, continued economic and technological growth; peace, securing peace and partnership; improving international cooperation. These 5 aspects are interdependent. Therefore, the SDGs demand integrated thinking as well as integrated approaches to achieving them. Focus on people is to end poverty in all its forms, end hunger, ensure healthy lives, ensure inclusive and equitable quality of education, and achieve gender equality and empowerment of all women. Also, the focus was on planet and prosperity, and the planet and prosperity means that to ensure sustainable consumption and production, take urgent action to combat climate change, and to conserve and sustainably use oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. The focus on peace, also to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. The focus on partnership is to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. These are the 17 SDGs. Let me just only to talk about this slide only, challenges for sustainability. Poor countries will reap big benefits from globalization if they manage to overcome their technological isolation without major initiatives from the developing countries, governments, local companies will face difficulties. On one hand, participating in the which resulted in an even and unequal development. What is the solution from my point of view? What is required for these nations is a good telecommunication infrastructure, not only for the general development of the nation, but also to enable developing countries, transnational corporations, and SMEs to participate and benefit from this globalization process. Developing countries' governments have to play a key role in education and training, and the industrial success of East Asian countries give a very, very good lesson to other developing nations. Without urgent action from LDC's governments, there is a growing danger that these countries will get completely out of pace with the process being made by the developed world and growing disparities between the developed and developing world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very, very much. Questions from the floor, from the audience? Professor, my question is, we know that globalization brings benefits to a country. Is there any particular way that country becomes slave to globalization?
Yeah, I can find that globalization can give, as I told you, many opportunities, but these opportunities can be taken only by developed nations because they have the ability to spend on IT, information technology, on infrastructure, also to invent and they have the ability to get the know-how, how to invent the products, how to invent new services. But for developing nations, they only know how to use the technology. They are lacking behind because they don't have enough training, they don't have enough skills, so they cannot produce such technologies or such manufactured products that can compete in global markets. So from my point of view, that globalization has led to many closing up to many companies, local companies here in Egypt, for example. We find many companies cannot compete, even not in Egypt. I'm not talking only at the international level, but also I'm talking about the national level. Many local companies closed and they were replaced by multinational corporations everywhere. You can go to any shopping and you can find only brands like Nike. You can go to eat, you can only find brands like Pizza Hut or Kentucky or whatever. Where are our local restaurants? Where are our local industries? So from my point of view, I always see that globalization had many negative impacts on developing nations. If they cannot spend more money on training, on empowering personnel, increasing their skills to produce, to compete, they are lacking behind, and there will be more developmental gap between us and them.
Thank you.